This talk is nothing more than a reminder. It is a reminder of a lesson I learned long before I could read or write. And it's a lesson that comes from my grandfather, who loved to learn and taught me how to love to learn as much. As a kid, I used to spend a lot of time with my grandparents. I would start and end my days sitting on a couch next to my grandpa, and we would watch all of these documentaries, go through so many books from his library. There were these encyclopedias, atlases, nonfiction, fiction, you name it. And usually, we would also be snacking on sliced peaches or pomegranate. By the way, always covered in a lot of icing sugar, because that was his favorite way of eating fruit. My grandpa, he was a big man, but a kind and a really loving man. He was a trauma surgeon who loved history and politics. He was a student of science, but really, he was a pupil of the world. And he was a man who truly stood by his beliefs, never letting that stand in the way of him genuinely listening to what others of a different opinion had to say. Even if that person was me, even when I was just 5, and even when my arguments made no sense at all. If I were to imagine my grandpa today, I would definitely picture him back in that living room. He would be in his armchair, and there would be this row of windows just behind his back. This gloomy and soft sunlight would come into the room over his broad shoulders. And he would have these thick reading glasses on, together with this blue or brown plaid shirt. And to his left, there was always this huge pile of newspapers, barely holding it together. You see, I don't remember a single morning from my childhood that my grandpa didn't start by reading at least 3 newspapers. Actually, the first ice cream I ever bought myself was one summer morning from the change I got after grabbing 3 main dailies for him. And he would go through them during the day, cover to cover, checking each story, regardless of whether he actually agreed with their views. It didn't really matter whether he liked the authors or editors of those dailies, but he would check from first to the last story, digging deeper into those that he really cared about. Besides sports, to be frank, he wasn't that big on sports. This huge pile of newspaper, it was sort of like an amusement park of his own making. Each morning, he would be presented with this wide array of different topics, new commentary to be discussed, maybe new opinion pieces to either agree with or not agree with. But it was this puzzle of different ideas, and quite often completely conflicting ideas. And that possibility of disagreement really excited him, because he knew that with each and every counter-argument that he stumbled upon during his readings, he would eventually grow as a person. All of us here today in this room, we are people of different convictions. And these convictions, they make up our identities and our relationships. And with time, these convictions should be allowed to change, because that's the way for us to grow, not only as individuals, but as members of different groups and societies as a whole. The stories that we create and share, they tell a lot about the world that we live in, but also a lot about the world that we want to live in and the world that we want to leave for next generations. And these stories, sometimes they will be our source of inspiration, knowledge, maybe even refuge. And they allow us this feeling of satisfaction when we agree with them, or a feeling of victory when we won an argument against them, or even the feeling of realization, maybe even progress, because we learned something new, and we might have also changed our mind. For the longest time, Newspapers were the main source of those stories, either for our local community or the globe in general. And those stories, they lived on those thin printed pages just for one day, never to be seen again. Unless you had an archive, just like my grandpa had his huge pile of newspapers. And to be frank, my grandpa was a hoarder. There's no denying it. Was he afraid that the news might change overnight? I'm sure we could argue that. But one day, things really did change. I was now in my early teens, and after school, I went to visit him. I entered that apartment, took my shoes off, and I went into that living room I spent so many hours in as a kid. And on the first glance, everything seemed in its place. My grandpa was in his armchair. The row of windows was still behind his back. He had his thick glasses on, as well as one of the many plaid shirts. And he was intensely delving into the story that he found that day. I was sure he was just about to tell me what it was on. The thing was, though, that he wasn't holding newspapers in his hands, but he was holding a tablet. And when he saw me, he was so excited, he could barely form a full sentence. You see, that morning, he found that story on this new gadget of his, a small gadget in his huge hands, and he decided to make use of it, right? So he found one story and decided to investigate whatever there is to find more about and connect those pieces together. So he started with an online article, right? And then moved on to a couple of Wikipedia pages, because that's what you do. And then he also visited a couple of blogs. It's a very, very bizarre forums. And everything that he found, it was all laid out there on a coffee table between the two of us. Because my grandpa decided to print it all out. He was like this detective of a local crime, connecting the dots right in front of him. You see, a man who had for 50, 60 years been buying 3 newspapers every single morning discovered the internet. And also in the process decided to print it all out so it wouldn't disappear in his watch. To me, this memory is one of the strongest testaments to how profoundly technology has been impacting our lives. Because to change the habits of a kind but a truly stubborn 80-year-old man is quite an accomplishment, if you ask me. Now, looking back at that coffee table, it was just a snippet of what our everyday was soon to become. The way that we come across new information and content every day, it resembles millions of coffee tables at once. It's this jungle of topics and formats and channels that we consume minute in, minute out. And it is truly an exciting and amazing age that we live in, because no matter what pops next into my mind, your mind, all of your minds, within just a couple of seconds and in the palm of our hands, we can investigate and find whatever there is to know about it, or at least almost everything there is to know about it. So in this age, when it's easier and more accessible to find whatever it is that interests you, I must ask, when was the last time you really delved into a story you cared about? How often do you question the headlines and claims that you see online? And when was the last time, do you even remember it, that you truly changed your mind and let your own opinions and stances change so you would grow? Regardless of how easy and accessible it is, how come it sometimes feels as if impossible to find that one story and really stick with it for longer than a couple of seconds? To be honest, to stick with the story has always been a choice. And it's a choice that we have to make ourselves. to think about the hypotheticals, to think about the alternatives, to investigate and be consumed and engaged. It was always, always a choice. And every afternoon that my grandpa and I spent together digging deeper into those stories that he and I really cared about, he made sure that I remember that choice today. I come from an industry that tries to grab your attention every single second of every single day. And no matter what the story, I fight a battle that often feels already lost. Because instead of proving my value to you as a reader, I have to prove my value to the algorithm of your feed. And instead of proving my value to you by offering you new and relevant insights, I'm only worthy if I agree with you. And instead of proving my value to you by offering you something new and exciting and engaging, I'm only worthy if your connections liked me already. In this world that is drowning in content, minute by minute, and that is getting more personalized by the second, enclosing us in these bubbles that are honestly already really hard to get out of. And in the world in which artificial intelligence is only amplifying the levels of societal division and the amount of fake news that we've already been witnessing, this is my friendly reminder to spend a bit more time with the stories you care about. It is a reminder to take that extra step for the topics that define you, who you are, and what you stand for. It's a reminder to think about the nature of your sources. And it's also a reminder to really appreciate the age we live in by being aware both of its good and its bad. After today, I will go back home. I'll enter the apartment and take my shoes off, and I'll get into the living room I spent half of my childhood in. But this time I won't go for the couch or the sofa I used to sit in, but I'll get comfortable in that armchair my grandpa used to be in. And I'll take my phone out, and I'll check whatever it is that has been going on today on too many platforms to count. And I'll see so many stories that feed into my beliefs. And I'll see even more short videos that are similar enough to yesterday's for me to like, but different enough to keep me engaged. But I will remind myself to find that one story that I will dig deeper into tonight. And I really hope you will do the same. Thank you.